The Week 11 main slate is a tough one, but not because there are no plays. It's because there are too many plays at one position and only a couple to use at another. So it's going to be a tough podcast for today, trying to dissect which of the running backs we want to prioritize, which of the quarterbacks suck the least, and where we can find value elsewhere to jam in all those good running backs. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for numberFire.com. Brandon, Week 11 is on the horizon. How you doing today?
Good. I think you hit on the main sort of pain points for this week. Usually by Thursday, I have a good feel for the slate. I'm not quite there with this slate because of the things you mentioned. We have some stud running backs with Dalvin and Alvin. We have some value backs who are a little appealing, but I think this slate is going to be one where popularity kind of dictates what I ended up doing come Sunday. So those are always fun for me because I'm fine admitting that I don't know everything. And whichever guys get talked up the most, aside from the stud running backs, I don't really feel conviction toward anybody. So I'll just kind of play it that way. And that's always fun for me.
I think the tough part for me about this slate is that so much of my non-running back positions revolve around the quarterback, because basically it's like, how many wide receivers do I use where I don't want to use their quarterback? It's the answer is usually not that many. But I feel like this week that number will have to grow because there aren't many quarterbacks I want to use. So if there are only 3 quarterbacks who I actually like, I can't stick to just receivers on their teams and the opposing teams.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
If you use any sort of optimizers, just like and you have the option where it's like use a receiver from the other team. It's a little bit trickier this week, I guess. Because there are only so many quarterbacks that we want to use. So I'm gonna have to figure out how to just navigate that. But I think that this is a good mini stack week. I think that's kind of what the lack of quarterbacks is kind of talking about. One game in particular that we will probably talk up, I would assume more than most, but Cincinnati and Washington. I think it's a great mini stack game. I like Joe Burrow. Jim hates Joe Burrow this week for what it's worth.
Joe Burrow. How can I hate Joe Burrow?
You said you hate Joe Burrow.
I just don't like. If I'm ranking out quarterbacks, he's not going to be in my top 3, and there are only 3 that I actually like. So he's fine, and he's one of that 3rd tier quarterbacks. But
I think so. Since 2016, there have been on average 0.3 quarterbacks, or one every 3 weeks or so, who are rostered on at least 20% of Sunday Million lineups. I think we might get there this week just because of the way that it breaks, but that could be a bad read.
Lamar or who?
Well, I think between Deshaun and Lamar.
I don't think Deshaun's gonna be as popular as you might think. I don't think people have fully embraced the fact that the Patriots defense.
Yeah,
sucks.
That's true.
So I think that's why
could be Jameis.
Yeah, actually, that's probably very true.
Because it just doesn't there. You mentioned this, I think, on Twitter, but there's not. We don't have the
top 5 highest scoring quarterbacks on a per game basis are not on this slate, partially because one of them has a mangled ankle in Dak Prescott, but the other 4 are just not on the main slate. So that's tough. Only 3 of the top 10 highest scoring quarterbacks on a per game basis are here. That does not include Lamar Jackson. I think it's Aaron Rodgers, Justin Herbert, and probably Deshaun. I don't actually recall for sure. But I think that we've spent a lot of the season talking about how you need 30 plus points out of your quarterback. You still would like a path to 30 plus points out of your quarterback, but I think it's less of a prerequisite for using them than it would be usually. And we'll talk about that in just 1 second. But first, the Week 11 FanDuel Podcast Network Listener League is posted. As always, it's a $5 entry with 3 entries max. It is rake free. That means that FanDuel makes nothing off of this contest. All the entry fees go right back to you, the listeners. To enter, go to FanDuel.com/league/listener league. That's FanDuel.com/league/listener league. You can also get a link to it in the podcast post up on numberFire.com. If you're watching on YouTube right now, go to the Week 10 recap post or this Week 11 preview if you're listening to this after it has been posted up on numberFire. Eligibility restrictions apply. Also, before we dive in, quick note about next week's schedule. We'll have 3 NFL podcasts next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Monday is the Week 11 recap podcast, 9 a.m. Eastern on YouTube. Tuesday is our Thanksgiving slate preview. Always one of my favorite podcasts the entire year. We'll go through each of the 3 games, talk about the way we're building lineups for that. That is at 10 a.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube page. And then on Wednesday, we'll have our Week 11-12 main slate DFS preview, 10 a.m. Eastern, Wednesday on YouTube. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 9 a.m., and then 10 a.m. and 10 a.m. on Tuesday, Wednesday. All those will be posted on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed immediately after. So make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Also have a UFC podcast up right now via Austin Swaim, previewing UFC 255. Let's take a look at this Week 11 NFL DFS main slate. I think the big questions for me are the ones we've talked about before. Which running backs are we prioritizing? Because we got a lot of, even with Christian McCaffrey not on the slate, we've got a lot of good running backs to choose from. And which quarterbacks do we use? And I think that the which quarterbacks discussion actually spirals into a second discussion in that normally my lineup building process for DFS revolves around setting skeleton game stacks where I have the quarterback with whoever I want to stack them with and with whichever players I want to run it back with on the other side. And then I fill in the rest from there. I think this week it might revolve around putting in different combinations of the running backs I want to use and then using whichever game stacks actually fit within the salary that's left to me. Brandon, what about you? What are the main things dictating the way you're viewing this slate?
Yeah, I think those are probably the 2 biggest ones. Jumping off of the running back one, we have a few low salaried running backs who have some appeal. Specifically Kalen Ballage and Savon Ahmed. But I think a big question you're going to have to ask yourself is, do you really want to prioritize Dalvin Cook? If so, you might have to you don't have to use one of those value backs, but how good do you feel about those value backs? And then I've been kind of eyeing up receiver a little bit more, this year overall, because we haven't had to pay like 10-5 to roster Dalvin Cook. Now we have to. So it's, Can you get to Devontae Adams at 95? He's 1,300 more than Michael Thomas. So like Devontae, we know can break a slate. We've talked about Devontae specifically throughout. I'll talk about him more in the trend section, but if he's not 100%, so like, how do you handle Devontae? Do you just kind of ignore him? That's always scary. So I think Devontae himself, because of how receiver kind of drops off outside the top 4, I would say, of Devontae, Michael Thomas, Julio, you can throw Calvin Ridley in there if he's healthy, and then Keenan, it does fall off quite a bit there. So I think that one thing that we will probably overlook naturally, if I didn't point it out here, is how to handle Devontae and maybe some of the stud receivers.
And I think the problem is I like all those receivers a lot. But
do you like them more than Dalvin Cook?
Exactly.
And Alvin?
There's a big opportunity cost in using them over the running backs. And I have to decide. And that's why I think that it's worthwhile to talk about guys like Kalen Ballage and Savon Ahmed, because they're viable on this slate. So we are going to discuss all that throughout the podcast today and let you know how we are viewing things and, what we're going to wind up ultimately doing on Sunday. But first, let's start things off here with injuries. The big one is Drew Brees has broken ribs and a collapsed lung. Football is a terrible sport, so it looks like he's going to miss this week at least. That leaves Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill at quarterback for the Saints. We'll talk about that offense in the trend section. Christian McCaffrey is likely to miss another week. Actually been ruled out already. That keeps Mike Davis in the lead back role one more week. Lead back role. Teddy Bridgewater was limited in practice on Wednesday. It sounds like he is going to be good to go. We'll see. Matthew Stafford missed practice on the other side of the thumb injury, but Kenny Golladay was able to return. Stafford has said he's taking it day by day. On Monday, he said he thought he'd play, so that was actually kind of a step backward there. So a lot up in the air at this game. We'll talk about that one in the trend section. Devontae Adams missed practice on Wednesday with an ankle injury. Sounds like he'll still play. He was kind of non-committal, but reading the tea leaves, I know the Packers are very conservative when it comes to injuries, but reading between what he was saying, it sounded like he thought he'd play. And at least part of the time, he'll be alongside Alan Lazard, who is activated from injured reserve. He will have some sort of role here, though they're saying that it will not be a full role, so I would probably not use Lazard, but worth noting he'll be there. We'll cover this in the trend section as well. Joe Mixon missed another practice Wednesday due to his foot injury. He has not played in a month now, and it seems like he'll sit again here. So where are you on Giovanni Bernard at $6,300?
Despite needing value, I haven't really looked at Gio. I've been more enamored with, believe it or not, Kalen Ballage, Savon Ahmed. So I haven't really been there with Gio, but I really like that game. Yeah. So I might, because I like that game so much, I might get to Gio more. But if I didn't like the game as much, I don't think I would be quite there.
I think that Gio's issue is that I'd rather find the $600 to get to DeAndre Swift or spend down for Ballage and Ahmed, because Bernard's fine. But he kind of has a similar issue with we talked about with David Johnson, where his ceiling from a usage perspective is not very high. He also lost more work to Samaje Perine this past week. He did lose some to Travion Williams. That was on the final drive. That doesn't matter. It was more the Samaje Perine being involved that concerns me with Gio. So I think like you said, I might get there because I like that game. Maybe I'll mini stack him with Terry McLaurin or Logan Thomas, but I don't think he's a priority on this slate. Matt Breida was able to practice in full Wednesday. He has missed the past 2 games, which has allowed Savon Ahmed to emerge as a legit running back here. But Breida's back, so how are you handling Ahmed with that being considered at $5,600?
So Ahmed had a really, really good role last week. A lot of carries, not a whole lot of receiving work, which is why I think you and I were both in on Myles Gaskin so much, is because he'd get carries and targets. I'm not saying that Ahmed won't get targets, but we didn't see it. So that's a little bit concerning. So if Breida's back, I think you have to lower yourself on Ahmed, but he wouldn't be a core play for me anyway, necessarily. He would be kind of a way to get off of some Kalen Ballage exposure, because it's hard to say, but I liked Kalen Ballage coming out. I'm a Kalen Ballage guy. He has been really bad, but this year he's been the best Chargers running back by a good margin. So I prefer Ballage to Ahmed quite a bit.
So let's talk about Ballage independent of Ahmed and talk about him here, because we've had no updates on Austin Eckler. He tweeted out a video saying, hey, I might be back soon, but no word outside of that. Sounds like Ballage will get another go-round as the Chargers lead back, another revenge game for Kalen Ballage too, which is obviously the only important thing. He played 73% of the snaps last week, and he had 18 carries and 6 targets. That is 30 adjusted opportunities. And the issue that I've had with Justin Jackson as being a value play on the Chargers is that he was splitting goal line work with Joshua Kelly. Ballage did not do that. He had 7 red zone carries. Justin Jackson has none the entire year. He had 4 last week. I think he had 4 rushes inside the 10 last week too. So Kalen Ballage is much, much, much better from a profile perspective than what Justin Jackson was. And I was willing to use Justin Jackson at a 10% exposure rate. So are you in on Ballage in this spot?
Yeah, seems like the team wants to use him too, and just that snap rate and just the amount of opportunities with the targets is really promising. I know it's hard to shake that feeling of Kalen Ballage from whatever his low yards per carry number has been in really bad situations. I don't think that's really indicative of his talent necessarily. We've seen something from him, and again, especially compared to the other Chargers backs, he's been very good. So it's a better situation. The team wants to use him even more for some reason, which I love this passing offense this week. So that's a little bit concerning, but I think Kalen Ballage is somehow in 2020 a standout value play.
Well, I think that loving the passing offense actually makes it easier to love Ballage, because I can feel better that they'll move the ball efficiently. And that's what matters so much at running back. So I think that Ballage – so I don't know. If I were ranking running backs after considering salary, Dalvin's 1, Alvin is 2, Miles Sanders probably 3. And then I would say Kalen Ballage is in like a steel cage death match with DeAndre Swift for number 4.
Yeah, I mean, we love Swift as a talent. We saw a lot from him last week. The salary is still very nice. But I think with that discount, Ballage might have an edge.
I also feel better about the quarterback situation. I love Matt. We love Matthew Stafford here, but it's not Matthew Stafford. It's Matthew Stafford with like a dangly thumb. So that's important to consider too. So I think that I'll probably want to put in Ballage a little bit higher, but like that's not a shot at DeAndre Swift, who I still like a lot. It's just that I think Ballage's situation is really good here. The Eagles designated Zach Ertz to return from IR, and he was practicing on Wednesday. There's no lock that he's back, but if he is, how would that impact your view of this Eagles offense in what I think is a good spot against the Browns?
I'm not in on them at all. They look like a team with dispersed target market shares from an inefficient quarterback. I know Carson Wentz can put up some yardage, in good spots, and this might be one of those, but I think picking right is going to be difficult. And there are, despite not feeling amazing about a lot of game stacks or a lot of offenses, I still am not that high on the Eagles. And part of that too is Travis Fulgham would be the one I would want the most just for the downfield work, but he's 6,800 and that's not really something I'm excited to pay for Travis Fulgham.
I think I like Jalen Reagor. He had 7 targets last week, which was most in the team. He had 6 the week before that, or the game before that, I should say, because I had to buy. He hasn't gotten downfield work recently, but he did early in the year. And I think that's enough to get me in on Reagor, just because like I need low salaried receivers. I'm going to be in the mid 5,000s a lot at wide receiver, and he's there.
Yeah.
So I think that he'll be one of the guys that rotate in. But because of the issues you discussed, with which I agree, he can't be a priority. I think that they are going to be pretty spread out. So Miles Sanders is the priority, Dallas Goedert a consideration, and Reagor is a guy I can rotate through. Because Goddard had 17 targets the first 2 games, even with Ertz being active.
Yeah, he had 6 last week, which is probably the most relevant sample with Miles Sanders playing, Alshon Jeffrey back. Not very involved, but definitely something
he was there
to consider. And Jalen Reagor, that he's one of those guys where maybe the downfield distinction for us is at least 16 yards downfield. He had just one of those targets last week. Travis Fulgham had 3, but the ADOT for Reagor was still 13.7 yards downfield. Fulgham's
so intermediate
15.
throws.
So like it's not bad. And like I said, Fulgham's salary is too high for me. I prefer him still straight up, but with the salary discrepancy, I can't play Fulgham, but I can play Jalen Reagor. So he's the only one.
That's the right way to phrase it. Straight up, if they were the same salary, I'd go Fulgham because like he's produced and production matters. Like I know we don't want to chase it because like it could mean they're due for regression, but like he's earned a role and I like that's not going to go away. So I know they've said they're going to increase Jeffrey's snaps, but I would hope it's not at the expense of Fulgham. But I feel pretty good about Reagor. And like he's a rotational guy in the mid 5,000 range, which is what I need. Yeah. So let's move now to our trends discussion for week number 11, starting off with, I believe, the highest total game on the board. That is between the Packers and the Colts. And this is an interesting one because we know the Colts defense is very good. We respect them a lot. We also know the Packers offense is very good. And I think we're assuming here that Devontae is good to go because he seems like yeah, okay. So you can talk through that here, but I think interesting spot here where it's 2 good teams, and there's a lot of value in using games that involve 2 good teams.
Yeah, and it's in a dome. I don't know what the weather looks like overall. I just kind of wait for you to.
It's not bad. It's not bad. It actually looks pretty good.
It's never bad in a dome, though. So
it was 17-mile-per-hour winds in Cleveland on Tuesday, and I was tilting. But then I opened it on Wednesday and pooed myself because I was so happy that the wind speeds were down to 7 miles per hour. So,
well, this game
I'm in a good mood.
This game has currently the highest total. It's one of 2, at least when I looked, above 50. 2 good teams, like you said. We should love this game, and it's a lot easier to like one of the teams more than the other here. That being the Packers, but even they're not perfect. It's either from a salary standpoint, Aaron Rodgers is 9,000, Davante Adams is 9,500, and I wrote this trend initially to look at this team whenever Davante Adams and Aaron Jones were both playing. Adams was limited in practice on Wednesday. I assume is going to play, but like I said, I have both covered. Aaron Jones is 8,200. We've been pretty big on Aaron Jones lately. Last week was a little bit concerning, but so typically we would funnel toward Aaron Jones out of the three, but we're not enamored with the quarterbacks overall. Aaron Jones, we know, has a ceiling. He has played 6 games with Davante Adams fully healthy. He's produced 0.29 passing net expected points per dropback, which is twice the NFL average of 0.14. He's averaged 288 yards in those games, 2.8 passing touchdowns, 24 FanDuel points per game. The Colts are 8th in adjusted pass defense based on numberFire's metrics, and even in 4 games against top half pass defenses with Davante, Rodgers is still good. 0.25 passing net expected points per dropback, again, NFL average full season. 0.14, so almost still twice that, even in tougher spots. 280 passing yards, 2.8 passing touchdowns, 22.5 FanDuel points per game. So I think that works, particularly with a few other upside quarterback options. But as for Adams and Jones, they've shared 4 full games together. In those games, Davante Adams has 35% of the targets, which is 12.8 per game. Jones actually has a strong 15% target share of his own, which is 5.5 per game. And then Marquez Valdez-Scantling is at 15%, 5.3 targets per game, so a smidge lower. But if you look at the FanDuel production, Davante's averaged 22.2 FanDuel points per game. Aaron Jones just 12.4 in games that they've shared. Valdez-Scantling is at 15.9, and he has at least 17.6 in 3 of the 4, despite low volumes. So that could be a little bit misleading. Allen Lazard also probably going to be back. So I'm not fully in on chasing MVS after last week, but what I'm seeing here in this sample is that Aaron Jones is not quite the Aaron Jones that we've seen without Davante. So that's concerning. Jones has averaged 24.5 adjusted opportunities per game in this sample, which is carries plus 2x targets, because on FanDuel, a target for a running back's worth about twice as many fantasy points as a carry. That adjusted opportunity number is about Miles Sanders level in a much better offense, but he's been around 60% of the snaps when healthy. And I've been much higher on Aaron Jones this year. I think it's probably fair to scale it back if Davante plays. Now, if he doesn't, Jones is up to almost 28 adjusted opportunities per game in those 3. Allen Lazard has been very involved, 21% of targets in 2 of those games. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, 20% of the targets. And somehow Aaron Rodgers is still really good without Davante this year in a smaller sample. So the question becomes, this is a high total game, but I don't love Aaron Jones in a tough rushing matchup with Davante. So, and the Colts are their whole own mess that I didn't want to get into because they don't give anybody market shares that are worth rostering in DFS. So my question is, this game on paper looks like it should be one that we should love to stack. But the question is, who can we really prioritize here? And what are your thoughts specifically on Aaron Jones with and without Davante?
I think that he's a low exposure tournament play, right? We know he has a ceiling, and that is valuable, especially in a game that could be close. But it's the same thing as we discussed with Gio, where I'd rather spend up for Dalvin or Alvin or spend down for Miles Sanders or the other guys. So he's kind of in a weird spot. And if I don't wind up with any exposure, that's fine. I know I can't play everyone. He's not someone I need to get in there, I don't think. That's okay. That can burn me, but I can't play everyone. And that's the tough part about this week, is I have to prioritize. And he's one of the guys where if I get exposure, great. I'd love to 10, 15%. I'd love to get there. But if I can't, I'm not going to, it could burn me, and that's fine.
I think there are real concerns with what I laid out whenever Davante plays. He's not the offense flows through Davante Adams, not Aaron Jones.
Yeah. If Davante sits, I'd have concerns about this offense being good against the Colts. I know that Rodgers was good in the 2 games without Davante, but was one of those a Tampa Bay game? What? Let me see here. What was the play stuff in the game against Tampa Bay where they just totally collapsed? Like, that's just one game, and it was a situation where things got a bit out of hand. Okay, so he played New Orleans and Atlanta, it looks like, without Devontae. And then had him for, I believe, the Tampa Bay game. But again, that thing kind of spiraled out of control. New Orleans and Atlanta at that time were not as good. Or at least New Orleans wasn't as good as Indy is right now. So I think, like, Rodgers would be off the table at 9,000 if Devontae didn't play. Like, he could come through, but that's $1,300 above Deshaun Watson. And, like, I think Deshaun Watson's median projection might be higher than Aaron Rodgers, and his ceiling projection definitely would be, or at least to be on par with Aaron Rodgers, straight up. So I don't know. Like, I'd like to go with this game because I agree with you. It profiles well. I think that Michael Pittman Jr. is fine at $5,500, kind of similar to Rager, where I'm not prioritizing him, but it'll be a guy I rotate through at 55. Jair Alexander will be back this week. Sounds like Kevin King will be too, but, like, if he's going to get work, he's going to get work. So I think it's kind of like a situation where I'll go with some Devontae, some Aaron Jones, some MVS, and some Pittman, but I can't go more than that on anyone here, I don't think.
Right. Like this game, you know, if you're starting out with daily fantasy or you're sticking to, like, what you know to be true, it's the highest total, tight spread, capable offenses, but it couldn't be less appealing overall for all of those being accurate.
Yeah. Like, I think that, like, there is a lot of value in game stacking this one if you want to be contrarian in tournaments because it does profile so well and isn't super logical. But, like, I would need to have a lot of lineups to get there, I think is what I'm saying. So let's move to my first trend here and talk about the Saints offense with no Drew Brees because, I mean, they're playing things coy here with what they'll do without Brees, but I think it's pretty reasonable to assume Jameis will start with Taysom Hill sprinkling in. And we don't know much about Jameis on the Saints, but we did see them without Brees last year, and we might be able to draw some conclusions from looking at that. So let's try to look back at that here. There was a drop-off in efficiency under Teddy Bridgewater last year. His passing at expected points per dropback was 0.20 compared to Brees at 0.35. And we've seen Teddy do well this year, so it's not as if he was some scrub. It's just like there was a drop-off in the offense. And they also didn't really change the offense. Teddy's average depth of target was 6.2 yards compared to 6.4 for Brees. Now, it's important to note that Teddy is different from Jameis, shockingly. I know this is breaking news to everyone. Teddy's ADOT this year with the Panthers is 6.7, whereas Jameis last year with the Bucs was 10.4. I would expect that number to come down from where it was, given that Teddy's gone up a half a yard on a new team, but it'll still likely be up from Brees' mark, which is actually at 5.4 this year. So, like, if I'm projecting Jameis' ADOT this week, I'm setting that over-under at 7.7 or so. I think that's probably where I'd sit. You can disagree with that if you want, but I think that's probably where I go. They also stayed pretty pass-heavy with Brees out. They threw 62% of the time on early downs in the first half with Teddy starting. It was 63% in the full games that Brees played. They're at 56% this year, so they're lower from a passing rate perspective overall. And it seems like that'll probably stay pretty static without Brees, and that all adds up to be good for Alvin Kamara, shockingly. They may lose some efficiency, which hurts, but they're probably going to run enough for him to be good, and Jameis isn't going to become the bomber he was in Tampa Bay, so obviously we can keep status quo in Kamara. I think we could potentially move up Michael Thomas a bit. Jameis did throw to him 5 times in 10 attempts in the second half. He's at 21% of the targets in his 3 games this year with just 2 total deep targets, but those were against tougher secondaries. He gets the Falcons here, and they are more beatable on the outside, and they're a bit of a pass funnel. They encourage teams to throw against them versus run. The problem is that everyone's going to bump Thomas up. Like, this is not being contrarian to move Thomas up due to Winston being a quarterback, so I would project Thomas to be pretty popular. And that could lead us to a pivot, but there's no super logical pivot here. Emmanuel Sanders was the only other skill player to get more than 50% of the snaps last week. He was at 58 despite Traquan Smith leaving pretty early with a concussion. So that's tough. Now you could go Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill, I think it'll be a popular route, but I'm kind of okay with it regardless. He's $4,500 at tight end on FanDuel, which is awesome. He played a season-high 22 snaps in Week 10. 10 of those were at quarterback. He actually played 9 quarterback snaps the previous week when Drew Brees was not hurt. So There won't be a contrarian way to play the Saints unless you fade all of them. I'm probably just going to go the safe route by using Kamara. I will have plenty of Hill, and I will get to Thomas, but I would not be shocked if I wound up being underweight on him just because I think he will be pretty popular. So, Brandon, how are you viewing this team with no Drew Brees?
I'm just glad that you said pass funnel, because I remember probably like 2 years ago at this point, the funnels were like all the rage. Everyone was a pass or run funnel.
Yeah.
Haven't really heard that.
You were either one or the other. There was no way to be, you're just a normal team.
Yeah. So I'm glad, because that's a term that we should be bringing back for sure.
Yes.
So I think you hit it right, or at least right as I perceive it, because the Saints.
No, that means it's right. We're good.
The Saints are one of those teams where they have two guys, and that's basically it. If Michael Thomas is out, they have one guy. If Alvin Kamara is out, Michael Thomas plays, they have one guy. They just spread it out between everybody who isn't Alvin Kamara or Michael Thomas, and that is a problem because we can't really pivot. This isn't like the Chargers and everyone's talking about Keenan Allen. It's like, well, Mike Williams or even Hunter Henry or whatever the running back. Like, there's no opportunity to do that. Taysom Hill was by far the most intriguing. Now, this is probably not going to happen, but the team's really not committal who the starting quarterback is going to be. I think we all assume it's Jameis. But if we find out that Taysom Hill is named the starter and you can play a starting quarterback at 4,500 at tight end, what does that do for you?
Don't get cute. You use him, right?
But
you go 100%?
100%?
Yeah.
I think it's close.
No, I think it is 100%. I've never used a player in every lineup. I would do it there, without a doubt. I do not care.
I think, but along with that is, would you trust that?
I would trust him with regards to Kamara. It would lower me a buttload on Thomas.
I'm saying if the Saints come out and say Taysom Hill's our starter for this week, do you trust that he gets like starting quarterback reps?
Like, I'm going to go hard on Taysom Hill regardless. So if they do that, I'll just increase it. Like, he's going to lose work to Jameis, especially if they fall behind. He would probably come off the field there.
Yeah. So I'm saying, look, again, don't get cute. If he's named the starter and they're planning on using him as a quarterback,
100% exposure.
So I just wanted to throw out that caveat, which again, I don't expect. I don't anticipate.
Right.
But yeah, and Jameis leads the way in fan share tags so far at this point. So
where are you at on Jameis? Just assuming that things stay status quo, because I think that because he's $7,200, because of the upside discussion where we don't have a lot of high upside quarterbacks here, I think that he's viable. But I'm also very, very willing to find the 500 to get to Deshaun Watson or the 1,200 to get to Lamar Jackson. So Jameis is probably third or fourth in my quarterback list, but I'm okay not having him top two.
I would use a good bit of him, but I don't think I'm quite that high because there's the Taysom Hill worry. And then there also is the worry that they just sort of use him in a low capacity fashion with a lot of checkdowns to Alvin Kamara. If Michael Thomas is not getting downfield targets and it's just kind of the same, it might be okay. But I think what is most appealing with Jameis being there is that I do think that people will gravitate to him, and that's going to leave someone like Justin Herbert way too unpopular for where he should be.
I agree. I like Justin Herbert too. So we'll talk about him later on. Any other thoughts for you on this one?
No, I'm going to use Jameis. I'm going to use a lot of Kamara. I'll use some Michael Thomas whenever I can spend up for a receiver, and then I'll mix in some Taysom Hill for sure.
We're not talking about the Falcons side in the Vegas or the bookmaker section. So I think that this is actually a good week to use Julio because everyone's going to be on Michael Thomas. Julio's in the exact same game, tremendous game environment. and he's $100 lower salaried. So I think that Julio's very good. I think that Calvin Ridley, I saw some clips of him, some hashtag film of him running routes in practice yesterday. He looked pretty good. So I would say both Julio and Ridley are in play for game stacks, but also like it just as straight pivots. What about you?
Yeah, for sure. Those two would really be it. Maybe Hayden Hurst, but
any Matt Ryan?
I don't see why not. He was one of the names I was considering for my player picks.
Okay.
It's another good, just overall game environment. There's no reason to be against him. He's actually one of the biggest positive regression candidates based on his net expected points and just his actual fantasy points. Now, they got to stop handing the ball to Todd Gurley at the goal line.
Yeah, that's the issue is like Todd Gurley gets 40% of their touches inside the red zone, and I hate it.
Yeah.
I hate it.
I think if you want to play the Saints and get weird, I think this is probably one of those spots where you do something like play Jameis, play Kamara and Taysom Hill and Julio and possibly also Ridley, or like, I'm not saying double.
Well, I think if you're trying to get weird, the route to go is Matt Ryan, Julio, Hill, Kamara. That's going to be really expensive, but like, I think you can do it because of Ryan's salary and because of Hill's salary. So yeah. I think that's a good way to do it. I think Matt Ryan is someone I want to make sure I use in tournaments this week because just it's a good game. Yeah. Everyone's talking about the other quarterbacks. So I think that's appealing for me. Let's move now to a game that like I would love if I knew the quarterbacks were healthy, but we don't know that right now. So let's talk about the Panthers and the Lions. Interesting situation here because we got a lot of moving pieces here. Because of the quarterbacks, we also have a lot of moving pieces in the personnel. So we're going to assume that Teddy's good to go and look at this Panthers offense in situations where Christian McCaffrey's been out, but also with Curtis Samuel getting more work here. What do you see with this team in those splits, Brandon?
Yeah, we've looked at the Panthers like with and without Christian McCaffrey a few times now, but we're back. I think it's a good discussion to have because Mike Davis was bad last week. He underperformed. Again, so he's underperformed in 3, maybe 4 straight games without McCaffrey, depending on what your expectations were. He had, I think, 12.5 FanDuel points in one of those. Like, not great, but that happens. But I mean, we're in a spot where I think we could get drawn back in. You and I were not on Mike Davis very highly last week. On Monday, we were not fans of the salary bump to 7,400, but I've kind of warmed up to it. The Lions, of course, not a good run defense. They're 32nd in adjusted rush defense based on numberFire's metrics. They're 30th in rushing success rate allowed to running backs. Now, Davis, as a starter, has played 5 straight games against top 7 rush defenses. Doesn't get any better than this. Didn't really get a whole lot tougher than what he's had. In those games, he had averaged 11.7 FanDuel points per game, but was below 8.2 in the 3 most recent ones. Gets a lot easier now. But Davis played 53% of snaps last week. He did leave with a thumb injury. The x-ray came back negative. And we like to look at adjusted opportunities again, carries plus 2x targets. In Davis's first 4 starts, he averaged 29.8, which is like elite. It's about as good as it gets. But he has been at exactly 17 in his 3 most recent starts. For some context, that's like a Jamal Williams type workload. We're not, that's about what we're looking at. So we have to balance the matchup with the anticipated workload. You know, is the question has he seen fewer opportunities due to the matchups he's been in? Is he just not holding up the way that he did earlier because he's been playing more? And I think a big part of the reason to worry still is that Curtis Samuel's now a thing. And like, that's a big part of this. Over the past 3 weeks, Curtis Samuel has three total red zone carries and a rushing touchdown. Davis has 2 red zone carries in that span. They each have 2 in the 2 games without Christian McCaffrey in this sample. But the strange thing is, as you pointed out to me, Samuel has a red zone carry in 7 straight games. He has 18% of the targets as well. He's a factor. So this game looks like on paper looks very stackable. We know the quarterbacks are not fully healthy. So like, are you in on Mike Davis? Are there too many red flags here? What's your thought on Davis specifically, but then also there's kind of this game in general?
I think that you discussed the Davis situation well, because the reason that we we were not as high. And Mike Davis last week was not the matchup. Like for me, at least, it was more the workload. And like the workload didn't.
It's both for me.
Okay. It was partially the matchup, but a lot of it was the workload. And the workload, it didn't alleviate those concerns last week. And like you mentioned the Samuel rushing attempts. You mentioned the last 3 games. In the game before that split, he actually had a 12-yard rushing touchdown too. So like, and this is, I don't know if this is like me, just my brain being jumbled from watching a lot of Bills games. They use Isaiah McKenzie like every time they're in the red zone. And I think that Curtis Samuel might be getting a similar type of treatment where they kind of utilize that speed once they get in the red zone. I don't know. Like, again, I could just be brainwashed by the Bills, which I would hate. But like, I think that's kind of happening, and I think it's intentional. So yeah. I think that we need to start discussing Curtis Samuel in the same way we discussed Deebo Samuel. Oh, wow, I didn't realize it's the same last name. We discussed Deebo and Brandon Ayuk, Robert Woods, where the rush attempts matter. And as a result, Curtis Samuel at $5,600, I think is actually potentially my favorite guy in that range. And I like that range. Don't get me wrong. But I think Curtis Samuel is actually near the top of that heap. I like him a lot. I would say that this is a great week for the Panthers passing game. If Stafford plays, because I want them to keep it close. But like Robbie Anderson has gotten really good usage. If you look at the 4 games since Samuel came back, he has 27% of the team's targets. In the 4 games with Samuel being back, he had a 50 or 48% snap rate in the first game in that sample. So I think that the sample you cited is more relevant. But like, you know, if we're going to expand it a little bit, 27% is not bad. So I think that Anderson actually,
past 3.
Yeah. Yep. So I think that Anderson, who is like a little bit more expensive than like I'm going to be for most of my wide receivers, I think he is a very undersalaried player at $6,300. The problem is there are other guys in that range like T. Higgins who I want to use. You got Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson there. So it's a good range, but I think that Robbie is like a deity tier tournament play this week.
S tier.
S tier?
Yeah.
What is S?
I think it's Japanese, but
okay.
that's God tier.
Okay, S tier. I like that.
Also, hasn't scored since week 1. I know it's a part of its usage, but eventually he's got to score again. And we know Robbie Anderson can like house something. So
he has. Like that week 1 touchdown was from like the opposing 20-yard line. So yeah, he can. I would say that Anderson's an elite pivot as a result of that. Now, Mike Davis, it's a different discussion this week than last week because A, like you said, the matchup is better. B, people are not going to be as high on him because he just burned them. He was a full practice on Wednesday, so the thumb injury is not a concern. So I would say I might honestly wind up being very similar on Davis to what I was last week from an exposure perspective, where I'm probably around like, I actually don't know where I was. I might have been actually like at 28%. I can look at this because I always slack it to you guys. But I think I'll probably wind up being around 15% Mike Davis. Just because DeAndre Swift, if you look at the fan share tags, is really high, and it's just the same game pivot at a similar salary. So a little bit higher on Mike Davis this week than I was last week, despite the salary hike, but I can't view him as a priority because that workload is very concerning, especially with Curtis Samuel, I think being an actual focal point of this team in the red zone. Yeah,
the matchups get overstated often, but these are basically the complete opposite ends of the spectrum. Outliers are really all I care about now. So like the Buccaneers, the Steelers, those rushing matchups I do care about. So that was a big reason why I was low on Mike Davis. With the price, the salary increase, I'm probably actually still higher on Davis this week than I was last week.
Yeah, I think that's where I am at too, a little bit higher at least. I said 15 to 20. It'll probably realistically be more 10 to 15 just because I do like DeAndre Swift a lot and I know I can't help myself. But I think that's the right range.
I don't want to get out over my skis on DeAndre Swift because that's an excitement versus can you trust the coaching? Like there's that balance we got to keep.
The skis are gone, baby. The skis are gone.
Yeah, I can tell.
Let's move into my second trend here and talk about pace because outside of the Atlanta-New Orleans game, no games like really make a ton of sense for stacking. We talked about the Colts Packers game. That one's tough. So the other angle for game stacking could be focusing on pace and trying to find games that stand out there that could be really fast and feature a lot of plays. There are 3 games on this slate where the average situation-neutral pace ranking of Football Outsiders, the 2 teams, is 12th or lower. That's non-scientific, so don't use that often. But whatever. It's a good shorthand. Those games are the Eagles at Browns, Bengals at Washington, and Jets at Chargers. I think all 3 of those games have at least some sort of game stacking appeal, whether for mini stacks or for full stacks. The one where I could see myself getting to the quarterback is the Chargers. We know the Jets need to keep pace to make Herbert viable, but they had all 3 of their receivers finally healthy back in week 9, and they showed life. Like Joe Flacco was launching bombs, and Mekhi Becton missed most of that game. He's good to go now, and that's good for Herbert. I think that he is objectively oversalaried at $8,500. Despite that, I am still willing to use him here and stack him with any of his 3 pass catchers. I would say Herbert is my number 3 or 4 quarterback this week. He's right there. For a bring back option, I would rank Brashad Perriman highest because he's $900 lower salary than Jamison Crowder. Those 2 guys and Denzel Mims are viable as well. As far as the other games, the quarterbacks aren't as appealing here, at least for me, but the skill guys really are. For Bengals against Washington, I like the receivers a lot on both sides. T. Higgins keeps on getting downfield work, keeps on converting on that downfield work. He's $6,500. Terry McLaurin, I almost always am lower than consensus on. However, he does have at least 95 yards in both games. Alex Smith has, or in the 2 games, Alex Smith has played a lot recently.
Alex Smith has 300 plus in both of them.
And 50 pass attempts in one of them. But that's enough for me to want mini stacks of those 2, T. Higgins and Terry McLaurin. Specifically, Gio may benefit as well. For Eagles-Browns, I am happy to stack Miles Sanders with Jarvis Landry. Sanders is averaging 26.6 adjusted opportunities per game when he's healthy. Landry has a 36% target market share in games without Odell Beckham. We just haven't noticed it because the bad weather has been there for both games. Now, again, the weather could always get weird. As of right now, it's 7-mile-per-hour winds. But I think that if that sticks where it's at, there's rain, but I don't care about rain. I think as it stands right now, both Jarvis and Austin Hooper are really good options. Nick Chubb also does benefit from this pace, and he's not going to project well because the targets, but he has a ceiling, and I think that in this game specifically, his ceiling might be really good too. So Nick Chubb, I would say, is another guy I would like to use. So to me, I think mini stacks are on the menu for this week, and I think that all these games are viable for that. And I think that the Chargers-Jets game is actually pretty solid for full game stacks. Do any of these games stand out to you here?
Yeah, 2 of them. The Bengals and the football team. Love that game. It just, again, if you look at it from a process standpoint, the pace is great. The pass rates are great combined. Alex Smith has just been throwing a lot of passes. And I also love the Chargers and the Jets. Love Justin Herbert. I'll talk more about him in a bit, but you mentioned ways to bring it back. I think it's viable with those 3 pass catchers. The problem is you kind of have to guess right. I would be lowest on Crowder. He historically this season has gotten a lot of work, but that was kind of without Mims and Perriman. So I would just chase the downfield work with Mims and Perriman. I would rank them higher, but I'm lowest out of these 3 on the Eagles and Browns. It just feels like one of those games that there are paths for it to burn us. Carson Wentz can make a mess out of really good matchups, really good game environments. And then also the Browns. I mean, the Eagles are 17th in adjusted rush defense. We know the Browns would love nothing more than to give their running backs about 20 carries each and just kind of grind it down. So I'm most concerned about the Eagles and Browns out of these 3, which is weird because of the 2 of the quarterbacks in the other games.
Is it concerning enough for you to lower Miles Sanders or no?
No, I love Miles despite what we had last week. I know he had a short touchdown vultured. Boston Scott had a huge play, but Miles Sanders is still very appealing, and he's one of the best plays at running back on the slate for sure.
Are you in on Jarvis and Hooper or no?
To a degree, yeah.
Okay.
You need to save some salary at those positions anyway.
Yeah.
You can't. I mean, you can, and if it hits, if you play 80% of a low salary receiver and he goes off, that's fine. But we'll mix in enough down here where Jarvis gets some run. And tight end is really, really, really bad for a really bad position. It's really bad this week. So
except for Taysom Hill.
Sure. But last week, nobody scored any points, basically. This week might be kind of the same thing. So the more salary you can save might be the way to go.
Final question. I know you're talking about a couple of them in your player picks, but if you had to pick one Chargers pass catcher, where are you going?
Salary considered Mike Williams.
Agreed. I like the downfield work a lot for his salary. And like we talked about this before when we were talking about the games with big spreads. In big spread games, you want to target guys who get efficient targets, and downfield targets are efficient targets. Mike Williams gets those. So I agree. Mike Williams is a very good play this week. Betting on the NFL is great. Betting on the NFL with FanDuel Sportsbook is even better. Right now, FanDuel Sportsbook is giving you a chance to bet on the NFL season with reduced risk with their exclusive same-game parlay insurance. Simply place a 3-leg or more parlay on any NFL game to be eligible for the offer and follow along as the game unfolds. If you don't win your bet, FanDuel will refund your bet up to $25 in site credit. What do you have to lose? Head to FanDuel Sportsbook and place your same-game parlay today. It must be 21 plus and present in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, West Virginia, Indiana, Colorado, Tennessee, or Iowa. Will we read every state as they add more states? That's the question I have.
All 50.
I don't. Refund issued is a non-withdrawable site credit. Max refund $25. Terms apply. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net. In Indiana, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Colorado, call 1-800-522-4700. And in Iowa, call 1-800-BETS-OFF. Let's take a look at what bookmakers are saying about this week. The highest implied total on the slate actually belongs to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They are 10-point favorites against the Jacksonville Jaguars. The total in that game is 46.5. We saw the Steelers receivers go off last week. I'm not going to ask you about James Conner. I refuse. Are you in on the Steelers pass catchers or Ben Roethlisberger this week?
A little bit. Jacksonville's 27th against the pass based on numberFire's metrics. Ben's kind of taking advantage of good spots. He has 7 games against bottom half pass defenses, averaging just over 20 FanDuel points per game, 251 yards, 2.6 passing touchdowns. The issue is FanDuel was just like, they're basically all the same salary. You guys can go, figure it out from here.
Yeah, you figure this out.
So we need the efficiency, and there should be efficiency here. That if you're going to have target shares that hover just over 20%, you need efficiency. I don't think that's the issue. Juju actually leads the past 4 games in target share at 24%. Deontay Johnson's at 23%. Claypool's at 19%. So, you can make the case for any of them, and maybe this is just a bias against the Steelers because there are 3 pass catchers from the Chargers that I'm okay rotating in. Trying to guess right is a little bit frustrating here.
Yeah, Chase Claypool has 29% of the team's red zone touches or opportunities, I should say, carries or targets the past 3 games. And I think if I had to guess, he'll be less popular than Deontay. I could be wrong.
Just inverse the fantasy points from last week, basically.
Right. Although Claypool scored twice, so maybe that might not happen.
Well, Deontay just had a huge game.
He did. I am higher on Deontay now than I was then. But I think that if Deontay will be the more popular option, I'll just go Claypool. I'm higher on Juju than I was previously as well, but I'm not high enough where I'll take him over those 2 guys. Yeah. So I would say, because again, in games where one team is heavily favored, if you're going to target a wide receiver, they need to be a wide receiver who gets high leverage touches. Claypool in the 4 games with everyone healthy has 33% of the deep targets, Deontay 29%, Juju 17%, but Claypool also gets the rushing attempts. So I would say, to me, Claypool 1, Deontay 2, Juju 3.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Okay, tied for the second highest total are the Baltimore Ravens at 27.5. They are favored by 6 now against the Tennessee Titans. The Ravens' offense has been very frustrating, but this is a good matchup for them. So are you in on Lamar Jackson here, and are you running it back with any Titans?
Yeah, I like Lamar. The big issue here is both teams are below average in early down first half pass rate. This feels like one where It might be heading to halftime before you really even settle in. I don't know for sure that that's going to happen. But Lamar, the biggest question for me with Lamar is that he's not been as efficient as he was last year, especially on the downfield work. I don't really feel compelled to stack him with anybody, so it would probably be naked Lamar for me. And then if I was running it back, AJ Brown is phenomenal, but Corey Davis actually has more targets in the 5 games that they've played together, 7.4 to 7.2 in favor of Davis. But the workload, I'm not saying the talent, but the workload has been very, very similar, and that's not really reflected in their salaries.
Yeah. I actually am on the exact same page as you, which is kind of scary, where I prefer naked Lamar lineups and I run it back with Corey Davis. My actually default lineup that I'm staring at right now has exactly that. Previously, when we talked about Lamar, we said, like, if you have 10 lineups, what are you doing, as far as stacking?
Yeah.
I would say I want 6 naked Lamar right now, 2 Marquise Brown, 1 Mark Andrews, and then 1 fear of missing out Devin Duvernay lineup.
I knew that was coming.
I freaking love Devin Duvernay. He's $4,800 in the slate where I need to save. His snap rate keeps going up. He ran 29 routes last week. He's good. He's fast. He's crazy. Nick Boyle being out may force him to run more 3 receiver sets. So I think it's 6 naked Lamar, 2 Marquise, 1 Mark Andrews, and 1 Duvernay for me. What about you? You don't need to use Duvernay. This is do as I say, not as I do.
Use him than Marquise Brown, from being honest.
Fair enough.
I honestly would have kind of the most intrigue in Mark Andrews. I know you and I differ there, but we have seen Mark Andrews get some big games, primarily through multiple passing touchdowns, or receiving touchdowns, I should say. And with tight end being what it is, he's like the one guy who I think can really burn you a little bit. I'm not saying that I'm penciling him in for 20 FanDuel points, but I think, 15, 16 is within his range of outcomes if we're being realistic, if things go the right way. But based on how I feel about this game with the pass rates, or I should say the high rushing rates, I just don't really like this game. So I'd probably go like 7 naked Lamar, and then maybe 2 Mark Andrews, 1 Marquise Brown.
Okay, fair enough. I think that's close enough where we're on the same page here. The other team outside of the Saints, tied with the Ravens for the second highest total, is the Minnesota Vikings. They are 7-point favorites at home against the Cowboys. The Cowboys do get Andy Dalton back, if that matters. Is that enough for you to think the Cowboys keep this one close, or is it just Dalvin Cook in this game?
I think it might just be Dalvin, but again, here both teams are below average in early down first half pass rates. Dalvin obviously makes a lot of sense. Adam Thielen, I would be wary of chasing him after his, 2 touchdown game. He's 4 touchdowns over expectation from what he should be. I know part of that is a good red zone role, but I'm not quite there. And actually, Justin Jefferson over the past, their 3 post-bye games has actually had a higher target market share at 26%, which sounds awesome, but that's 6 targets per game, and Thielen's at 5.3. So we know what the Vikings want to do, and is run their offense through Dalvin Cook. I'm a little bit intrigued at Dallas with Andy Dalton back, just because nobody has been thinking about this offense for a while. But I really need to basically, like you say, make that assumption. So it'd be an assumption lineup where they do keep pace. Maybe they actually get out ahead through some passing work. But even then, you have 3 receivers to pick from, and you got to hit right on that. So I'm most likely just on Dalvin for the most part.
I think that I agree with your thoughts a lot on Justin Jefferson at $6,700. He actually has only 3 fan share tags this week, which is kind of like shocking. So I think that a fun way to play things this week is take the salary savings, use Alvin Kamara, and then have Justin Jefferson be your exposure to the Vikings. I think that's pretty viable. Michael Gallup is $5,400. If you think that Jefferson is in play, I think you need to use a Cowboys player. It doesn't matter which one. You need to use a Cowboys player if you're using Jefferson, I think. And I think Gallup at 54 is interesting. I'd go Amari, if not him, at 69. Zeke apparently is still not fully healthy, and he's $8,000. I think that's a terrible salary. So I don't think that I'm going to use him, but I think that Gallup and Amari are at least interesting.
CeeDee Lamb and Amari both have 18 targets from Dalton, which is like a 22% target share. Gallup's at 12%. I know that Gallup can still, he has the higher ADOT, the highest by far of the three. So I think I'd probably just take the chance with Gallup for a long touchdown maybe. But this is one of those games where I don't think anybody's really going to be on the Cowboys, despite everyone liking Dalvin Cook.
Right.
So I think there might be a little more value with, I mean, it's still Dalvin Cook. Like they would probably like to get him his 2 touchdowns and then just not play him down the stretch if they had their way. So like,
yeah,
so that is a little concerning with Dalvin if we're not at all on the Cowboys, which I think you and I are both at least
we're
a little intrigued. A little intrigued.
Yeah. I think that like if you had to pick a team to cover this week, would you pick the Jets or the Cowboys? I think that's a way to view this as far as like a game stacking perspective.
I mean, the Jets just because it's the Chargers, but I understand what you're saying. And I think that the Cowboys could for sure. So maybe I'll be more in on Dallas than I thought.
The rest also heavily favors Dallas off a bye with Minnesota having played Monday. So maybe that's an angle too. I don't know.
Yeah.
Andy Dalton has been better than both Ben DiNucci. And I know Garrett Gilbert played pretty well, but he played better than him too. He's not been good, but better.
Dalton's at negative 0.08 passing and expected points per dropback.
While you were talking, yeah.
Gilbert and DiNucci combined for negative 0.3.
Yep.
So like it's not even the same stratosphere.
We ain't even talking about the same ballpark. I didn't have the full Samuel L. Jackson quote, but regardless, the highest total game we have not discussed yet is actually the Texans and the Patriots. That's at 48, with the Patriots favored by 2.5, or I think it's actually 1.5 now. The Patriots offense has been playing better recently. The Texans offense is a great one for DFS, IMO. Is this a game you are looking to stack?
No, but I understand how it looks stackable. Cam Newton's been a lot better over his past 3.31 passing and expected points per dropback, so more than twice the NFL average, but does so on just 26 pass attempts for 189 yards. Houston's 26th in adjusted pass defense. Cam's rushing a lot, so there's that. Jacoby Myers has a really high target share, so like I think you can get your game stacks and get out. Honestly, we like Deshaun, we're gonna like Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks, I would assume. Jacoby Myers makes some sense. I'm not really there on Cam on a full slate though.
But I think that like if we're talking single entry, I would think that a Deshaun, Fuller, Jacoby Myers game stack is in discussion for single entry, right?
Yeah, to get different, sure.
Yeah, I think it's there for me. The problem is Jacoby Myers is gonna be popular, which stinks. I hate that.
This feels like, again, we know New England would probably just prefer to give Cam his 25 pass attempts, and that's it. And we know that Houston somehow always feels like they underperform for how efficient Deshaun Watson is. At least that's my bias against them. So I feel like this game could be it could be a shootout, but I think it's more likely than not that you might get your 45 to 48 points, and it doesn't really destroy you if you miss out on Cam Newton's 170 passing yards.
Are you in on Damian Harris at all?
A bit, yeah. He gets a lot of rushing work. It's a good rushing matchup. He is due for some touchdown regression. Again, it's a bit role related with Cam Newton, and then Rex Burkhead just having a bunch of touchdowns. But I think he's viable. I think I would rank him definitely behind Kalen Ballage. I don't know where I am with he and Ahmed with Matt Breida coming back.
I don't think I can get there.
I understand.
He loses red zone work to Rex Burkhead. He doesn't get targets. So I know the matchup is very good, but I don't think that's enough to get me there. Because sure, I prefer Ballage over him, but I also prefer DeAndre Swift. I might prefer Gio over him as well, just because the game environment there is so good and the salary is not that different. Actually, I do prefer Gio. Let me say that. I prefer Gio.
So just for context, I don't want to linger too long, but it sounds like you're higher on this game than I am. Where would you rank it, like on the slate?
The problem is I don't see a lot of games that I really want to stack. So like it's naturally going to seem high just because there aren't.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a very easy one to stack. Like I said, I think I said those. I don't know. Get your stacks with Deshaun, Fuller, Myers.
So what you're saying is the guys in this game don't have a lot of standalone appeal?
I would say that, yeah.
Okay,
I also think if you're stacking this game, there are only a few ways you can actually do it.
Which I think is actually a luxury, honestly.
It is, yeah.
I think that I would, if the statement were, I don't like a lot of the guys in this game as standalone plays, I would agree with that. I think that's a fair way to put it. But like for game stacks, I think it's pretty good. It's behind New Orleans, Atlanta, obviously. I would say it's in discussion for 2, just because I don't know.
The more I look at it.
Yeah. We're going to talk about positional plays here in just one second, but first, not a lot of weather on this slate. The only game where there is anything that's disturbing, not even disturbing, that's noteworthy, is that there's a chance of rain for Cleveland against the Eagles. Doesn't look too bad. The wind speed's there to 7 miles per hour, so honestly, like I don't care. It's the best weather they've had in Cleveland in a month, so I am on board with using Miles Sanders, Jarvis Landry, and Austin Hooper. So let's move into our position-by-position plays for week number 11 on the main slate. Brandon, let's start with you. Who stands out at quarterback?
So I think your 2 picks are the best 2 picks at quarterback, but I still love Justin Herbert, and I don't care. I think there are I think people will, if Devontae plays, I think people might want to pay up for Rodgers just because he is the one guy who has a high salary and he's Aaron Rodgers. I also think a lot of people will play Jameis. The fan share tags bear that out so far. But I love Justin Herbert a lot. The Jets are 31st in adjusted pass defense this year based on numberFire's metrics. Herbert has been really good this year, but he's only played 1 bottom 10 pass defense. He put up 347 yards, 3 touchdowns against the Jaguars. He's been super consistent with at least 21 FanDuel points in all but 1 game. The ceiling is very obvious. I don't want to overlook him because of the value options or Lamar. I want to make sure I get plenty of Justin Herbert. And I would honestly, if I like the value enough at other spots, I would consider him in a single entry because the matchup is just so promising. And the spread's not so big that you have to feel like it's an automatic blowout.
How big of an indictment is that on the Chargers that the spread is as small as it is?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So I think we should expect that game to be fairly reliable. My second love is another rookie, Joe Burrow, 7,700. You mentioned that you like that game. I like it a lot too. He's played 5 games. He's been much more matchup dependent than Justin Herbert. He's played 5 games against bottom half adjusted pass defenses based on numberFire's metrics. In those, he's been awesome. 317 yards per game, 2.2 touchdowns, 23.7 FanDuel points per game. The pass rush for Washington is definitely not bad, but it is not even in the same stratosphere as what the Steelers threw at him last week. So I think this game is really, really good. I'm going to be heavy on it, and that's going to include Joe Burrow because he's the same salary as Deshaun, who I think will get a lot of attention.
I don't think he will. I think that's where we split here. But I think that Burrow's fine. I think that he's probably top 6 or so at quarterback, but I don't know if I'll get to number 6 on my list. My favorite is Lamar Jackson. If I'm willing to buy into Jackson on a slate where we have limited upside options at quarterback, like if there aren't a lot of guys who can get upside, use the reigning MVP. The Titans rank 23rd in overall defense and 24th against the pass. And this will be just the 4th time this year that Lamar has faced a team ranked outside the top 20 in pass defense. As I say that, I realize just the 4th, considering it's like game 10 or 11 or whatever, is probably not accurate wording, but whatever. And the others, the opposing team couldn't keep pace. Baltimore won all those 3 games by at least 17 points. And the Titans may be able to score here. They're kind of weird and kind of disappointing, but I think that Lamar is very interesting. And like I said, I'm most likely to use him by himself with no stacking partners, running it back with most likely Corey Davis. My second love is Deshaun Watson. We have not seen the Patriots let up big games to quarterbacks this year, but that's largely because teams haven't thrown that much against them. They have been opting to run the ball against the Patriots' bad rush defense, but we know the Texans can't do that. Like they're physically unable to run the football. So that shouldn't be an issue here. The Patriots are 18th in overall defense and 15th against the pass. They will get Stephon Gilmore back this week. That doesn't really matter too much. Deshaun Watson averaging 6.2 rush attempts per game since Bill O'Brien got fired. So again, Stephon Gilmore will be back this week. I do not care. I think this is a tremendous spot for Deshaun Watson, and I don't think he'll be that popular just because I think people haven't really caught on to the fact that the New England defense sucks. And if you pull up the FanDuel module, it still shows the Patriots as being the 6th worst matchup for a quarterback.
It's probably in red too.
It is.
Yeah. So yeah, what I alluded to at the top of the show was we might see a quarterback on 20% of lineups. I think it's because nobody in particular stands out there. There aren't a lot of ways to go. I think Watson should. I guess it's just because I know how good Deshaun is and how not great necessarily the Patriots defense is. But I do think that, we didn't talk about Jameis Winston in our picks, but I think he will probably forge out ahead of everybody in popularity.
I agree wholeheartedly. So let's move down to running back. Tough to pick 6 here, I think, which is good. Who did you land on for your 3 picks?
Your 3 would have been my picks.
Okay. Sorry.
But Alvin Kamara, I can't complain. And honestly, I might wind up with more Alvin Kamara than Dalvin Cook because the savings do go a long way. It's not to say that I like him better straight up, but the salary does matter. At the start of the week, I thought there'd be a lot of running backs I'd love to play. There are a lot of good ones. Kamara, though, is still a priority at the top of, or near the top of the salary pool. He's got 24% of the targets, which is a team high in 2 games with Michael Thomas back. He had 3 of 10 from Jameis last week. Is getting red zone touches with a healthy floor of targets. Atlanta is that funnel defense. So the rushing, I wouldn't expect to be there, but if there's a running back who you need to rely on for targets, it's Alvin Kamara. My second love is actually going to be Mike Davis. I think you have to just be willing to go back to him. I do prefer, again, your 2 lower salaried picks here, but Davis has had just about the worst possible draw. 5 straight starts against top 7 adjusted rush defenses. The opportunities are a bit of a problem. Curtis Samuel is a bit of a problem, but this is a good game overall. And I think that Mike Davis can be fine at the salary, which is not egregious. It's not 84 at 74. I think that's a lot better. My third love is Kalen Ballage at 5,800. Anthony Lynn really seems into Ballage, wants to get him more touches. We like the targets here. He had 6 of those last week, in addition to the 18 carries. I think there's a narrative that's justified that Ballage is bad, but again, he's been the best Chargers running back by a wide margin so far. It's 33 carries, but nobody else has been good on their relatively limited volume either. And to me, kind of running back falls off after DeAndre Swift. Antonio Gibson's a little bit intriguing at 6,500, but he's due for some negative touchdown regression. I mentioned Damian Harris I'm higher on him than Jim is, and Savon Ahmed's down there, but I think Ballage of all the value backs is the one standout.
Also, we mentioned the Kalen Ballage revenge game. Let us not forget the other revenge game in this game, which is Anthony Lynn against the Jets. He actually used to be an assistant coach for the Jets. He was a running backs coach. I always like Anthony Lynn more than consensus because he knows the value of running back targets. And they're overrated from an analytical perspective, but for fantasy, they're great. So I think Anthony Lynn is awesome, and that makes me like Kalen Ballage more. And like I said, I think that he is, if not above DeAndre Swift, at least equal with him. So I think that Ballage is a great play too. My first love is Dalvin Cook with the value at tight end and kind of a wide receiver and quarterback. I can get to Cook this week, and I would love to. He is averaging 33.3 adjusted opportunities per game since coming back from his injury. That's stupid. I would love for the Cowboys to keep pace here, and they may be able to better do that with Andy Dalton back and facing a defense that cannot get a pass rush against that bad offensive line. So good week to use Dalvin, shockingly. My second love is Miles Sanders because, again, it's one of the higher paced games on the board. He's the best DFS piece within it on either side. Sanders is at 26.6 adjusted opportunities per game in his full games this year. He is disgustingly efficient as a runner. A Miles Sanders rush attempt has been worth like a quarter of an expected point more than a Carson Wentz dropback this year. So Eagles, time to establish the damn run, man. Let's go. Give Miles Sanders that rock. The Browns are 29th in success rate allowed to opposing backs, so give me Miles Sanders. And finally, DeAndre Swift got a big role change last week. He had 26 adjusted opportunities. He had a 73% snap rate, and he was good. Like, he keeps justifying the additional usage, which makes you feel good about it. If you want to expand the sample here and look at the Lions since their bye, even in that time, Swift is at 20.8 adjusted opportunities per game. So even if he does come back to earth a bit from a usage perspective, the floor is better than it would otherwise be. It's not just one game that we're going off of here. So the Panthers 21st in success rate allowed to opposing backs. I think that Swift at $6,900 is on par with Balaj. The more I think about it, the more I might put Balaj higher, but I'm really, really okay with both. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Who do you rank higher between those two?
Salary considered, probably Balaj, because I think one of the most important things we can do is take some caution and not buy into the hype. And the role change, if it sticks, is amazing. If it gets better, it's even more amazing. But we do see some spikes in some of these guys, and it doesn't always stick. And with the Lions, I'm a little less inclined. So I think I would put Balaj higher with all the savings considered.
I'm coming around to that too. I think I agree with you. So let's move to wide receiver. Who do you have there?
So I love the Saints and Falcons guys at the top, but if I'm prioritizing Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara, probably won't get there as much as I would like. So I'm going to go with Terry McLaurin at a lower salary, $7,300. I mentioned that I like this game already. McLaurin has an 18% target share in 2 games with Alex Smith starting, but that's not great, but it's still 8.5 targets per game, 1 downfield target per game, which is not amazing, but the floor has been really high for him because until last week, he's had at least 20% of the targets in every game so far. It was 16.4% a week ago. It was still 9 targets because the volume was really high, and he's had at least 7 targets in every game. At a certain point, volume does matter, and it does overtake just market shares. And Cincinnati's 20th in target success rate allowed to receivers. My second love, sticking in that game, T. Higgins, 6,500. Over the past 5 games with his snaps a little more stabilized, he has a 20% target share. That's 7.8 per game, 1.6 downfield per game, over a half a red zone target per game, 81 air yards per game, which is pretty solid, all things considered. Washington does rate out as a pretty solid receiver defense. They're 3rd in target success rate, but Pro Football Focus does a chart where they look at receiver and cornerback matchups. They're all a lot shorter, at least 5 inches shorter than T. Higgins, about 20 pounds lighter. T. Higgins gets downfield work, at least 5 targets in every game since week 2, at least a 19% target share in 6 of the past 7. So multiple downfield targets in 2 straight and in 6 of the past 8. So there's a floor and a ceiling for T. Higgins. And then my third love, similar kind of vibe here, but Mike Williams, 5,900. Love the Chargers passing offense this week. 17% target share in his healthy games, which again isn't amazing, but that's still 4 high leverage looks per game, 5.6 targets per game. We mentioned this on Monday, I think it was, but if you weight those targets for where they're coming, if you adjust for the leverage, he's at 8.1 weighted targets per game. That puts him on par with someone like Robert Woods, Justin Jefferson, Odell Beckham when he was healthy, obviously. Those guys are closer to 7,000 than 6,000, so I think that that's very much in play for how good the matchup is.
Yeah, I think that that's intriguing. Like I said, I'd rank him first out of those pass catchers, and this is not – I am a pro Keenan Allen person, but when it's $2,100 different on a slate where I need those savings, I think that Mike Williams is a very good play. My first love is Julio Jones because, again, I'm thinking that Michael Thomas will probably be pretty popular with Jameis starting, so I'm going to pivot to Julio in the same game for $100 less. Kind of seems like Calvin Ridley should be back, but in the games they've had both Julio and Ridley, Julio has 23% of the overall targets, 41% of the deep targets, and 30% of the red zone targets. So Julio's a great game stacking candidate, and I think, again, if I have one game stack in that game, it might be Matt Ryan with Julio Jones and then Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill, considering it at least. My second level is going to be Jarvis Landry, but I actually just want to talk about Robbie Anderson because I think that I'm talking about Curtis Samuel. Pooh! Okay, so Robbie's good, not an official love. 20% of the overall targets the past 4 games, 40% of the deep targets, use Robbie. Jarvis Landry, though, we haven't gotten to see him in his new role with Odell out when there hasn't been crazy wind, but he has 36% of the targets in those games. He has 3 of the 4 downfield targets in those games as well, so we haven't seen upside out of Jarv yet. I think it's kind of similar to the Josh Reynolds discussion from last week, though, where although we haven't seen it yet, I think the building blocks for an upside game are there. And as a result, I will use Jarvis Landry at $5,900. My third love is Curtis Samuel. I was going to talk Robbie, but, for Samuel, I think is my favorite guy in this range, too. The role has been really good with lots of touchdown equity recently. He has 35% of the team's carries and targets inside the red zone since he came back from his injury. That includes 4 red zone carries and 3 red zone targets in that time. But he's also just had good overall volume. In the past 4 games, he has 20% of the overall targets, 20% of the deep targets, 25% of the red zone targets. He's had 3 rush attempts overall in 3 straight games. He's had 4 in a couple of games. I think that if you think that Mike Davis will be too popular, Curtis Samuel is your pivot at $5,600. But again, I think Robbie's disgustingly good. Like a Robbie DeAndre Swift stack. Whew. Hose me down, baby. We're getting hot over here. So let's move to tight end, Brandon. What do you have there?
Nothing will cool you off more than talking about tight ends. So
I like Hunter Henry though. So you can keep me a little jazzed with that.
Yeah. Hunter Henry 5,500. The Jets 25th in target success rate allowed to tight ends. Henry has 19% of the targets in games with Mike Williams healthy. He has at least 6 targets in 4 of the past 5 games. The yardage upside has been capped. He started off with 73, 83, and 50 yards, but has not been above 39 since then. But, I mean, 2 downfield targets last game, and if you're looking for yardage upside at tight end, I'm not going to find it really anywhere at this point, unless Travis Kelce's on the slate. So I think there's a floor here at least. My second love is another part of that Washington-Cincinnati game. Logan Thomas at 5,200 has 6 targets in each of the past 2 games with Alex Smith starting. It's only 13% of the targets, but a 9.2 yard average depth of target, which is the same as Mark Andrews on the full season, which is pretty healthy for a tight end. And he's run 95% of routes or more in these past 2 games after dipping a bit below that in games prior. So I think he's trending back up. I think there's a semblance of a floor here from a tight end. That's kind of rare.
I also agree that he's trending back up, and I'm willing to consider him. And I had a couple shares last week, but that's the first time I've used him in a very long time. I think that he's viable this week, so I agree. And I like Hunter Henry too. My first love is Austin Hooper. He flopped last week, but it was pretty predictable with the weather. I had more than I should have, and I think that was bad process on my part. But I think now he gets to stay at $5,100 for an equally good matchup. The Eagles have led up at least 6 targets to 5 different tight ends this year, and that does not include Tyler Higbee, who had 3 touchdowns on 5 targets. So Hooper in a good bounce back spot at $5,100. But my favorite guy is Taysom Hill. Might as well. He is $4,500. He will probably be popular, but what he does is he minimizes salary allocation to a terrible position. He tends to get high leverage volume in the red zone. That's what we should look for. Minimize salary allocation to bad spots. Taysom Hill does that. He played 9 snaps at quarterback in week 9. He played 10 last week. He has 6 red zone rush attempts in those 2 games. So sometimes chalk is chalk for a reason. I think that's the case here. So Taysom Hill will be the tight end to whom I have the most exposure this week. I try to diversify quite a bit there, similar to defense, but I might just be pretty heavy on Taysom Hill this week.
Yeah. There's a weird floor for Taysom Hill, and
weird is the right word to use. I agree.
He'll get usage somehow, some way, which you cannot.
You don't know
say.
what it'll be.
You don't know. There's no safety really at tight end for anybody else.
Thoughts and prayers. People projecting target shares and market shares overall for the Saints offense this week. Kudos to you. Let's finish up here with defense, Brandon. I like your defense. What do you have there?
We always try to go with low salary defenses because it's not fun to spend up, although I think there are a lot of good high salary defenses this week. But if you're trying to save, I'd consider Carolina. There's a high total. Kenny Galladay's returning, but Matthew Stafford is not 100%. That can lead to poor throws and interceptions, could lead to some fumbles. They don't get a ton of pressure, but they are 18th in adjusted pass defense based on numberFire's metrics. And honestly, 500 to 1,000 on a defense goes a long way on this slate. So I don't want to just recommend like the Steelers, which would be a great play if you get there, but I don't build around defenses. And then there's also Atlanta at 3,200 against Jameis. They're 8th in pressure rate according to Pro Football Reference. So
I think that works too. I will say my first line. I don't know if
don't make us do multiple.
I think Washington is similar to Carolina because I like that game and I like both sides, but I'm okay with the defense too. It's a high-paced game, and we want that for our defense because it leads to lots of volume, and it's a high-paced game against a heavy volume passing offense, which is kind of ideal for a defense. Joe Burrow is good, but like his major flaw is that he hangs onto the ball too long, and that inflates sack upside for opposing defenses. It does not mean I won't use T. Higgins. Again, I love T. Higgins, but it does up my thoughts on the opposing defense. I think Washington at $4,100 is a good option. I agree. Carolina, though, is very viable. I would also throw out there that I am not opposed to Cincinnati at 37 on the other side of this game because it's still Alex Smith. He's not very mobile. I think that's another one I would at least mention. Yeah. That's all we got. Any final thoughts for you, Brandon, on this slate now that we've actually had some time to talk it through a bit?
It looks better than I initially thought. I think a lot of games are somewhat stackable. Like New England, Houston. I think Tennessee, Baltimore, you can throw in some kind of obvious stacks there. We did not mention, I don't think, Derrick Henry's name. Don't have a whole lot of interest. Didn't mention Miami, Denver, but that's the lowest total on the slate. But I think that this one. Oh yeah. I think this slate is better than I initially thought, and I would assume Atlanta, New Orleans is chalky, kind of every which way, and there are ways to differentiate. But even within that game, like you pointed out with Matt Ryan.
Yeah. The more we talk, the more I think that Matt Ryan is a pretty solid tournament play, but it's going to be hard for me not to be super high on Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson. So Ryan.
I'm going to have I'm going to have way more Cowboys than I would want.
What could go wrong? That is all the time that we have for today. But as mentioned, a jam-packed week next week. We have NFL DFS podcast Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, and also subscribe to the FanDuel YouTube page, as we will be live for all three of those podcasts Monday at 9, Tuesday and Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube page. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
The Mac Gadula 13, GDULA 13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck with your Week 11 DFS lineups. We'll talk to you on Monday to wrap it all up and get you set for Thanksgiving. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.